If you ask me what's my favorite gambit in chess, I wouldn't think twice. The Smith-Morra Gambit is my favorite gambit. And as any gambit, you are just offering a pawn for an exchange as an advantage in development and initiative in attack. And that's exactly what you get when you play the Smith-Morra Gambit. You gambit a pawn and you get a very fierce attack against your opponent. And if you don't like facing the Sicilian Defense, this is a very strong option that even masters and grandmasters play. And today I'm going to show you how to play this opening for white and how you can get some quick wins against black, even some 10-move checkmates. And there's a trap to win the queen as well. But before we begin, if you are not subscribed to the channel yet, welcome. This is What the Fork Chess. I'm Victor, and I post videos pretty much every day with chess tips for improvement, so make sure to subscribe. So of course, if you play the Smith-Morra, you're starting with e4 and your opponent is replying with the c5, Sicilian Defense. And if you don't like facing this opening, just like me, just play d4, and this is the beginning of the Smith-Morra Gambit. You're offering this central pawn for your opponent to take, but you're not going to take back with the queen. You are going to offer another pawn by playing c3, and this move is inviting your opponent to take this pawn, and then you're going to take back with your knight, and you have a lead in development. You have some open lines here to attack, so this is a very promising attack against black's position, and you have a lead in development. You're going to develop your other knight, you're going to develop your bishop over here, you're going to castle very quickly, and bring your rooks to these open files, and it's going to be amazing. You can push this pawn, and it's going to be a really, really powerful attacking, very sharp line to play against black. And more often than not, your opponent's not ready against that. They're more ready against, the open Sicilian lines or the anti-Sicilians like Rossolimo, things like that. So your opponent's probably going to go for the obvious moves, the more common moves, and we're going to check those moves. The first one here, knight to c6, of course, this is probably the most played move here. You're going to develop your other knight, and after d6, you are going to bring your bishop to c4. So just remember these moves order. You're going to develop your knight over here, and then you play your knight to f3 and your bishop to c4. And you're already putting some pressure here on this f7 pawn that is, of course, known as to be a weakness. And from this point on, your opponent can make pretty much 3 moves that are considered here. And that would be e6, knight here to f6, or bishop to g4. And this move, bishop to g4, is known to be the worst one because it loses basically on the spot here. Because this move, your opponent thinks they're pinning your knight, so you can't move this knight, but that's actually wrong. Of course, you can move this knight if you know what you're doing. So what you're going to do here is you're going to take that pawn with check, forcing your opponents to bring the king out, and then you can move the knight with check, winning the bishop in the process. So in this position here, you want a pawn. Of course, you sacrifice your bishop here, but you are already with your pawn back. Black's pawn structure is very bad with 3 pawn islands here, and the development is pretty terrible. And you can simply castle very quickly here and bring your bishop to the game, and you're good to go. So this is probably the worst move that your opponent can go for in this position. So if your opponent knows what they're doing here, they can play other moves. So if you see this move, e6, you're going to go for your main plan, which is going to be castling, bringing your queen over here to e2, and then bringing your rook to the center. So this is going to be your plan if your opponent plays e6. So that's what you get to remember. You castle, after they develop the bishop, you bring your queen to e2, and after they develop the knight, you bring your rook to d1, and your opponent more often than not is going to castle here. And this is your basic setup you have to remember. Of course, your opponent doesn't have to go for e6 in this move. They can also go for knight to f6. And whenever you see this move, knight to f6, you are going to immediately push this pawn. So if your opponent didn't play this move, they went for knight to f6, you're going to immediately push this pawn to e4, to e5, sorry. And then you're going to be met by one capture probably. Your opponent's going to capture with the pawn or with the knight, and let's see what happens in both scenarios. If they take with the pawn, you can just go ahead and trade the queens because the queens are staring at each other. You go ahead and take it. If your opponent takes with the knight, which seems to be the most obvious one, so they don't lose castling rights, you are going to immediately attack the weak square on c7, threatening to fork the rook and the king here. So your opponent has to do something very silly to defend that. They might move the rook over here. But what you're going to do here, if they play king to d7, is you are going to check them again by taking the pawn. And this is inevitable checkmate here. They're going to have to go back with the king. They have no other moves. And then you have, boom, a 10 move, 11 move, let's say, checkmate against your opponent. And this happens more often than not, believe me, guys. So the best move for black here actually to escape is to move the rook over here, but that's very ugly. You have a much better position in that case. You can castle very quickly and you have a better game. Of course, your opponent can also take with the king, right? In this case right here, instead of taking with the knight, they can take with the king, which is actually pretty bad. They're losing castling rights, and you can go ahead and start attacking the weak point on f7. You could, in this position, go ahead and take this pawn right away. You could have done that, but the threat here is even stronger because you're threatening to fork king and rook. Your opponent doesn't have much to do than just run away, flee with the king, and you're going to take the pawn anyway. You're threatening to take the rook now. They have to move the rook. And now you take this pawn. This is a little trick that you're playing against your opponent. It seems like you're basically giving up the piece, but you take the pawn, and as your opponent take the knight here, you pin their knight so they can't move this knight anymore. And this is pretty bad. There is not a good way to save this knight, so what they're going to do here is try to defend it with the king. And as they do that, you can snap that rook in the corner as they take back with the knight. Moving that knight away, you can castle with check and forcing your opponent to move the king over here, keeping the defense on the knight. And you bring another attacker. Now we have a lot of people ganging up on this knight. There is no way to save this knight. Is going to fall inevitably. So that is why your opponent is not going to go really well if they play this move, knight to f6. So that's why the best move actually for black here is to play e6. And you're going to go for the setup that I talked about before. You're going to castle, and then you bring your queen to e2, your rook to the center. And a lot of people don't notice, but this rook is pressuring a lot here, pinning this pawn, forcing this pawn not to move. And your idea is to just push this pawn right here so they can take. If they take, of course, they lose the queen. So that's why you're placing your rook on the d file. And your opponent's probably going to castle, and then you push e5. In this case, if your opponent takes with the knight over here, and they believe they can take this, of course they can't simply take this because the queen is just dropping. If they take with the knight over here, it's just blundering a piece. They're straight up losing a piece because you just take back, and they can't recapture because the queen would be hanging. So that's why this is a very bad move. When you push here, remember, this pawn is kind of pinned here, and this knight will have to move. And as the knight moves, we take that central pawn, forcing our opponent to recapture with either the bishop or the knight. And no matter what they do, we are going to end this game very well. So if they take with the knight, which is the most common move, you just develop your bishop right away, putting pressure on this knight. Remember, you have this powerful pin going on here. They can't move the knight because the queen would be dropping. So this rook on the d file plays an immense pressure, plays a very, very vital role in this opening. So they're going to push e5 here to try and block that. You're going to take with your knight, forcing them to take back, and then you recapture. You're kind of sacrificing more material here, but in the end of the day, you still have this very strong pressure going on over here. And if your opponent moves the queen out of the pin, you just have to be mindful that they're attacking your piece over here. You have a lot of attackers against this piece, so you have to defend it. You push b2 here, b3, sorry, and then you are defending that. And as they move out of this other pin that is very nasty over here, you can just go ahead and develop your knight, push your knight here to d5, and you are threatening to take this bishop with a nasty fork. So your opponent has to react to that. Moving the knight is the best way to defend this. You're going to take that bishop anyway, forcing the knight to go back and take it. And now you have another very nasty pin over here. And your opponent doesn't have much to do, just to move the rook out of the pin, and you trade pieces over here. What's happening is that they can't simply take back because you can win that rook. If they develop the bishop over here, you just take back. They're going to take the bishop over here, of course, that's true, but you can just play rook a to c1, threatening some nasty discovered attacks here on the queen, and this is pretty good for you. Of course, your opponent doesn't have to take with the knight. They can also go ahead and take with the bishop. And in this case, you're just going to attack the queen over there, right? And this is what you're going to do, forcing your opponent to kind of go ahead and try to block this diagonal. If they do so, you just take this pawn with check, forcing your opponent to take back, and then you take with the queen, again with check. And you are exploiting all the pins possible here. As the king moves away, you just move your bishop back to f4. You are attacking this bishop with so many pieces, it's impossible for your opponent to defend. This bishop is going to fall and you're going to be a piece up. So the best thing they can do here is to just move the queen over there, offering a queen trade. What you're going to do is take with the rook in this case, because you are defending your queen in case they want to trade. So if they don't want to do that, they just take with the knight. You trade queens in this case, and then you take the knight over there, and you end up with a piece up here in this position. So it's pretty good for you, the material. I think in this case you have, yeah, a piece up or an exchange. It's pretty good for you. You have a much better position, and you're probably going to win this game as well. I want to know what you guys think about the Smith-Morra Gambit in the comments down below. Try to refute some of those lines. Try to express your opinion. Tell me what you think in the comments. Like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. And as always, I see you guys in the next one.